So welcome to LivingWriter's interview series. Today we have Eric Jason Martin, who is a producer, director, and award-winning narrator of over 250 audiobooks, and now the author of New Arcadia Stage 1.
Yes, hi.
So thanks so much for being here with us today. You know, I was thinking of how to introduce you, and I've kind of looked into the stuff you've been doing, and I feel like it just doesn't encompass all the things that you've worked on. So before I asked you about the book, I just wanted to hear from you a bit about all these projects that you've worked on.
Yeah. I mean, it took a while to come to my first book, and I was doing a lot of things in other spaces that kind of led to it. So, I got into podcasting very early on in 2005. Had my first show, had a few successes early on in the podcasting boom. That led to live storytelling. I live in Los Angeles, so there was a lot of excitement going in the live storytelling scene, and also in improv comedy. So I did a lot at the UCB Theater here in LA. And all of these things kind of converged into my first audiobook in 2012. I was working with a co-host that we were doing a live show in LA called True Tales of Lust and Love. She was an author as well, so we figured out that she had written what they called them Kindle singles at the time, and she's like, "How do I get this into audio?" And that's where we found ACX, which is Audible's audiobook creation exchange. I produced it, and then from there started auditioning for things and narrating, and then very quickly got into that. And so, to date, I've narrated nearly 300 audiobooks now. But even since the beginning, I was interested in bringing in, excitement, energy, people from these other, ways of storytelling that I was involved in, with the comedy, with the storytelling, with podcasting, to kind of create new energy, life, dynamism to audiobooks.
That's interesting. So I saw on your website and everything that you've done some directing and producing. So what are those? What have you done as far as the directing and producing? Because it was so much all over the place. I was like, this guy has done so much. I'm confused of even where one thing starts and where the other ends.
Well, it all kind of twists together and informs each other. But it started, with the multicast stuff. It started about 5 years ago, and I produced a documentary of Tenacious D for Stitcher. So we went behind the scenes, got them in the studio for their Festival Supreme Music Fest. But then from there, we created an original series called Hoot Gibson Vegas Cowboy. I love Vegas and stories of old Vegas, so we got Andy Daly to star in that. Weird Al Yankovic, Rachel Bloom, Paul F. Tompkins, this amazing cast. And that was written for audio. And then from there, I teamed up with my old friend Mike Sachs, and we created a movie novelization. If you remember, when big movies, to some degree it still happens, but when big movies would come out, they would come out with the novelization, so kind of the book version of the script. So he had created a novelization of a movie that never existed, a 70s movie called Stinker Lets Loose, which was a trucker movie like Every Which Way But Loose, Smokey and the Bandit, but Jon Hamm was our, Smokey character, or Stinker. So it was Jon Hamm, Ray Seahorn, just this incredible, from Better Call Saul, just this incredible cast. And, we made it sound like an audio movie. And from there, I worked with, Broadway Video, who does, Saturday Night Live, The Tonight Show. They wanted to get into audio as well. So I directed Kate McKinnon and her sister Emily Lynne in their first series for audio called Heads Will Roll. And it was a musical comedy series that starred Meryl Streep. Kate and Emily were in it, of course. Peter Dinklage, just this incredible, Carol Kane, Andrea Martin, Tim Gunn, just this incredible cast. And so I'm here in LA, but I would fly out to New York and we would do it in the dark weeks between Saturday Night Live. And we're set up in the studio and people would come in. It was scripted, but we were able to improvise as well. And so kind of pick and choose the best stuff from that. So, there's that original audio, there's audiobooks. and there's the ways that the lines can blur. And so, from a very early point, I was exploring and interested in kind of pushing the envelope of what's possible, specifically in audio. But yeah, I'm a book. My 9 to 5, my regular day job is sitting in my home studio, and I'm normally narrating, as a single narrator, just books, reading them from beginning to end. So, having read a lot of them, I started to think, I could probably write one now.
I figured that's what happened. Because when I was looking at all those books, I was like, he must have been like, you know what, I could do this. I've read enough of these, I could do this.
And to go word for word and to really, spend so much time with each individual author, you learn, because you're so intimate and you're spending so much time with them, you learn what works, you learn what doesn't work, and you learn what plays well in audio. There are some books that just probably don't make sense in audio or could have been written better to be heard. Some books are not written that way, but maybe they should be. Yeah.
So when did you come up with this idea for the new Arcadia book?
Yeah, so, the general idea behind this book is, Ready Player One, not only inspired this, but it inspired a whole genre. And I love that book. I think it's just a great idea, but it's going into a virtual world. And, I've been a video game player since I was a kid. I love them. And I think it helps, to us navigate, how to work in this world, because so much of our society has become gamified, with in terms of achievements and points and all these things. I was interested in telling something in the game lit is, the genre they call it, kind of a sci-fi where you dive into a virtual world and it's as though you're actually there playing the game, but it feels real. So I've been wanting to do that for a long time, specifically with arcade games called New Arcadia, but it kind of takes you back to the old school days of arcade games. And for me, as a child of the 80s and 90s, this was in an area near and dear to my heart. Nobody really done it. I mean, Ready Player One had explored it to some degree, but so many of these, are like World of Warcraft, high fantasy stuff. I'm like, let's go back to and this is specifically the beat 'em up genre. So, when you just go from left to right across a 90s city. So this is set in 1990X, the game world is, and you go back into a beat 'em up world, but you have to live in it. So a couple of years ago, I was, and my writing partner, sometime writing partner, Justin Michael, we started to develop a beat 'em up world for an Audible original, but it was a very different story, and we were trying to figure out how do we make this work, in audio and story, to not get bored by it, because if it was just punching for 20 minutes, that would be exhausting to listen to. So we worked out a lot of that stuff, and it ultimately didn't make sense, and I'm glad it didn't, because then it got to take this form. So last March, I was getting ready to write a different version of this story as though it were a gamelet, and I got sick. I got a mystery viral illness that knocked me out for 2 months. I don't know what it was. It tested negative for everything. Wow. I have my suspicions, however. But yeah, I was knocked out for a while, and it still lingered with me for a bit. So then I began to think about the world that we're in, and the fact that if we're doing it right, we're at home and we're not interacting with other people, which has a toll. So how do you come together and interact with people? You have to do it virtually, like we're doing here with Zoom or other platforms. But what if there were a virtual immersion where you can actually come together as a community? Let's say you go back to 1990X, before all this stuff happened, and you just have pagers and other things. There's no internet really, and you just have to deal with each other one-on-one again, and that's the way you do it. So I started writing this book quickly. It came together. I started writing in June. It was wrapped by October, and then we were starting the audiobook right away after that.
That's amazing. So I guess you didn't have any issues building the whole world out? Like, I know a lot of our writers, that's something that they get stuck with, is building that world. Did you have any like techniques that you used, or were you just like ready to do this and it just all came out at once?
It was because I think the reason it came so quickly was one, because we had built the world prior, and so sort of the mechanics of it, how it would work. We developed like a 10-page show Bible for what it would look like. Ultimately, we didn't use it, but the mechanics were there. And then I had done a very early version of what a gamelit book would be like a couple of years ago. So I had some ideas, but and then I had 2 months of sitting around and getting better. And in that time, the wheels were spinning. So by the time I sat down, I wound up using the LivingWriter platform. And what was so helpful was, there was a hero's journey template, which was very loose. It just had 5 or 6 story beats in terms of what the rough chapters would be like. And I was like, this is all the structure I need. This is a tried and true narrative. I can play a lot within it, but to have some parameters and then have to work within them, that's where the creativity comes in, where you're pushing against some kind of loose structure, and that's where you get to play within a certain sandbox. So that was very helpful to have when it came time to write.
That's amazing. That's kind of why we came up with those, because there's, like you said, how like you can kind of like let the creativity flow, because it's so hard to if you're looking for plotting methods or something like that, and structure and organization, if you're pouring all your energy into that, there's like not as much energy left for the creativity. So I'm definitely glad you got a chance to check that out. Are there any other resources that you've used in the past for writing, like any tools or templates or anything, or books or anything like that you've learned for writing? Yeah,
absolutely. The there, in addition to just my time with audiobooks and with reading stuff out loud, which and I'll just say for anybody who is interested in audiobooks, the way to find out if this is something you want to do, just go to your bookshelf and pick a random book off the shelf, walk into your closet, sit down, and start talking out loud for 6 hours. And if you want to do it again the next day, then congratulations, you have what it takes. So that was helpful. And then Lisa Cronus, I believe is her name, Story Genius is the book that I read that was very helpful, because it connected, not just the structure, but this was the mechanics, the why, how one character decision, something in their history leads to another, organic motivations. So having the story spring from that, from very real places, was very helpful specifically in writing this one, because I had to check to make sure that I was honoring the characters and doing something that made sense within the world that I had created.
When you built out that world, did you also build out the characters prior?
It actually happened organically. So I started, writing, and it was through there, and I didn't, I had some vague sense of where I wanted it to go, but I liked the idea of discovery, of just finding, once I started writing, who would pop up and how they would interact with each other. So story problems were solved by the introduction of characters, and, traits came out as a result too. But there were certain things that I wanted to have as well. There were certain references to the 90s that I knew I couldn't get out of without using, and there were certain signposts along the way that I wanted to hit. So it was truly a mixture of all those things that informed it, and I allowed myself space to be surprised and to try different things. And it was a slow process, but by the end of it, I knew the characters and I loved them, and I knew where I wanted to take them next. I had some sense of where. Now, I don't know exactly where they're going to go, which is kind of thrilling. I'll figure that out for the next 2 books, but I have some sense. So that'll be a fun journey to continue.
So you decided on like the series before you knew where it was headed, even right from the beginning?
Yes, because that's the genre to some degree. So I realized that I was locking myself into, it was a big thing to do, to just jump right into a series for a first book. But the genre supports that, game lit RPG. Now, a complaint about it is that you start it and then a lot of these books peter out and they die halfway through, or they run out of ideas, that you can just keep writing and and then it gets boring, or you don't finish it, whatever. So I decided on a trilogy. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be more after that, but this story, I want to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, because I want that this first book, I made sure had a satisfying conclusion as well, so you can feel like, oh, I can just get into this and rip through it, enjoy it, and feel good at the end, and look forward to the next, but not feel cheated in any way. So that was important.
Yeah, I've heard other authors say, because a lot of I'd say probably every best-selling author that I've spoken with has series in their books, and a lot of what they say is that their readers get connected with a character and they don't want to see it end. They'll even end up taking those characters and putting them into other series that they have, because the readers just get invested in it and they want to have a series, and it ends up doing really well because of it.
Totally.
So.
And I've narrated many of those series, and I fall in love with those characters too. And and for fiction, they'll have their individual voices. And I know, when I start book 2 or book 3 or book whatever, that it's just like reconnecting with an old friend, and that voice comes naturally, and it feels good to hey, how you been? I've missed you.
That's amazing. So you wrote this last book in how short of a time?
It was roughly a 4-month period. Yeah.
That's crazy.
But then I used,
so short.
Jumping right into the audiobook, it became, a full cast production, which I'd imagined from the beginning. I knew that I wanted to narrate it as the main character, but also be supported by, a big cast of friends and people from various, there's video game superstars, there's kind of animation, Adult Swim superstars, and then there's audiobook superstars, and they all have a roles to play in this. But I used the audiobook production as essentially a final pass, both for editing, and for, and even playing with other characters, discovering new things about the characters just with dealing with the performers. And then as a result, some lines changed. And for me, narrating, I was like, oh, and normally if you're narrating another author's book, you can't change the word. You have to say it word for word as is, unless there's an egregious typo. But for me, I was like, oh, this doesn't sound right. I'm the author. I can just change it right here in the booth. So that was great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it took 4 months. How many, because you're doing all these other things, you're doing the other narrating, how many hours a day did you put into writing every day?
Yeah, I mean, it was about, normally I narrate for about 6 hours out of the day, and then other stuff, for 2 I'll do after. So that's a full day right there. But I will write in the morning. So first thing, I'm up, I'm refreshed, I'm a morning person, and I'll write for, an hour or 2 a day. And I can write pretty fast, especially if I have a sense of where I want to go. So I just did that steadily over those few months, and before you knew it, you can get 100,000 words in pretty quick.
Yeah. So how many words do you usually write in 1 to 2 hours? Do you know?
Yeah, it can be anywhere from 1 to 2,000 words. Maybe a little less, maybe a little more, if the spirit moves me. But and then sometimes it's just revision, and you don't feel like maybe you feel like you haven't written much that's new, but the day was very valuable nonetheless, because you were revising what was there, or you unlocked something that was a story problem. So it just depends. So I didn't beat myself up, if I didn't hit a certain quota. But what was important was to do it regularly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1 to 2,000 words seems manageable. I was speaking with someone, I think last week, and he was like, oh yeah, I do 5,000 words in 2 hours. And I was like, I feel so inadequate. And I feel bad for other writers who are even listening to this, trying to get 5,000 words every 2 hours. I was like, oh my gosh. So it's good to know someone can write a book in 4 months and put out 1 to 2,000 words in the 2 hours. definitely much more manageable.
Totally. And if you do less, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems though like the one really consistent thing with writers is this like 2 hours, just like 2 hours every day of writing, which is, you know, as long as you're enjoying the process, and hopefully you would if you're writing, you know, it's really not that bad. Even for people who are doing, like yourself, you're doing something else like pretty much full time. Like there's still time to do it.
Because those other hours of the day,
Awesome.
It's not like you're not working on the book. For me, it's just all happening. It's cycling back here. This is not me making crazy face, but yeah, it's all happening. You know, and there's physical things that you can do, like taking a walk, where a lot of these problems, because you're not focusing on them, your mind can wander, and you know that's where you'll have the most. Taking a shower, you know, wherever it is, and suddenly you'll just have an epiphany, and it'll come to you. And it's because you're not pushing, because you're giving your mind the space to make the connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think you mentioned before something about like, you know, seeing what works and what doesn't work when you're working with other authors and everything. And I know you've worked with a lot of other successful people in the field. Is there any like tips or inspiration that you've gotten from them over the years that has been useful for you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So many, every performer that I work with, I learn something for sure. You know, for working in audio, you get a lot of, I mean, the great thing about it is that you can get a lot done quickly. It's not like video. You don't have to set up, and there's not a camera, there's not makeup. You can just sit down and start talking, and that's incredible. But the other side of that is that, you know, you may be working with somebody who maybe they're a really talented improviser, but, you know, they're not great at, you know, fancy book learning, you know, or whatever, that, you know, that it's difficult for them to connect with the emotion on the page and make it sound natural. So it's, you know, for every person, it's very quickly, you know, sizing them up, figuring out where their skill set is, and how best to connect them to the material in a short amount of time. So just working with other people in, you know, in this profession, it can get very lonely sitting in a booth, you know, by yourself. But, you know, part of the reason I do what I do is to connect with other people and make it a social, community-based thing. So, yeah, I'm always trying to challenge myself by, you know, and there are some performers that I've worked with that have just, you know, completely blown me away. You know, where I go in with a plan, I'm like, I don't really have to direct them. I shouldn't be directing them. They know what they're doing. You know, my job then becomes creating an environment for them to, you know, be their best. You know, Meryl Streep is an example of that. I didn't have to tell her, you know, to do anything. She taught me a lot about how to, you know, make things happen. But my job there was to make sure that I was creating an environment where she could play and do her best. But yeah, I would say too that learn, you know, having your work done in audio will teach you so much about. That's the other thing too, was writing. I wrote all of these characters with somebody in mind, and then thankfully they all said yes and decided to, you know, be a part of it. So that was really helpful shorthand for me while I was writing, and I think that helped speed up the writing process because I had somebody in mind. I knew what their strengths were. I knew that they spoke, and you know, writing is hard, and you have a lot to do. So if you can make it really specific and kind of make those dramatic choices with somebody in mind, that lightens some of the load. That then you're imagining somebody, and it, you know, it doesn't have to be a real person. But it could be, you know, a fictional person. You know, maybe it's somebody, you know, from film or TV that you know have seen a lot of, like a character that you know, and this character that you're writing is like them. That could be a great shortcut for you know, for creating a whole backstory for someone. So all those things have been helpful. You know, one weird trick that I'll use to help the writing process.
That's so interesting. Like before I spoke with you, I didn't even realize that this type of audio presentation was even something that people do. Like I thought an audiobook is like one person narrates it, and I didn't even realize there's this whole arena where there's multiple people acting out each character, and that like, you know, all these like famous actors are doing it. Like I literally had no idea. So it's so interesting that, you know, this is even something that writers can look into getting into. Like I just didn't even realize. It's so cool though, because like when I saw some of the actors, I was like, oh my god, yeah, they would be so good at that. Like the what's his name from Better Call Saul, and like Jon Hamm. I was like, yes, they would be amazing. Like I have to hear that.
Yeah,
That's
Bob
so
Odenkirk
cool.
was another incredible guy. I mean, he was, you know, he's a very busy dude. So we wound up getting through 30 pages of dialogue, not full pages, but like, you know, scene stuff, in an hour. Like you can do many scenes, and just so it's an easy ask, relatively speaking, for actors, you know, to do it. And if they don't have to get into makeup, if they don't have to, you know, devote 3 months of their lives, if they're going to be in something fun with other cool people, I think that's part of the reason why more folks are into it. Now, again, for audiobooks, you know, still the standard model is one, or in romance, often it's two. You have a male and a female narrator working together. That is a big thing as well. But increasingly, there are these multicast productions, and they're really starting to push the envelope, and they're fun to do.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So you mentioned before about using LivingWriter for your book and using it for organization and things like that. Do you have any like tips for our writers about how they can use the platform to their advantage?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I'll say in terms of what worked well for me, it was, you know, picking a structure. And I played around with the structures a little bit too, and kind of test drove them a bit to see what worked for me. Those are helpful guideposts, I think. And then having options for characters and places to be able to create, you know, different things for those. And then another thing that helped too early on was assigning pictures to the characters. So, you know, going onto Google Images and saying, what might this character look like? As a guidepost, that was really helpful. And that was something I didn't expect would be helpful, but that helped it get specific and real, you know, in terms of getting these characters dialed in. So all of those tools were really, and then also being able to have it in the cloud was helpful. So, you know, I started writing it at my kitchen table. You know, I was writing it at my girlfriend's house and like outside. And then ultimately I wound up getting here in the office and finishing it up here. But just the ability to easily connect with it and take it elsewhere, I could write when you know, it struck my fancy. So that was helpful.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So I wanted to ask you, I feel because you've had a lot of success in all these different arenas, do you have any advice for people on how to grow themselves as either an author or a narrator, anything in this field? Like how you said you started with the podcasting and all that.
Yeah. I mean, you know, not everybody is going to follow the path that I will, of course, but follow your own individual path, I would say. And the way that you do that is by being curious. So follow your curiosity. You know, write what's interesting to you. You're going to spend a lot of time with this project, so, you know, make sure that it's a story you absolutely have to tell, because otherwise, why bother? But then also, as part of that curiosity, you know, find out about other things that are happening in, you know, yes, in your field, you know, other books, other authors, but find out what's going on in audio too, and then maybe find out what's going on in podcasting and other places. And that will give you ideas about, you know, how to approach your material, give you different ideas, different perspectives on how to approach your material. So benchmark, see what's out there, see what you can borrow, steal from, see what you reject, see what you don't like. And that could give you great ideas too about, you know, where you want to take it. Oh, it's what I want to do is not that. And then you have a lot of information. So, yes, I would say curiosity and you know, checking other things out and writing what you're passionate about. It's simple stuff, but it's important.
Absolutely. So, I know you just put out New Arcadia Stage 1, but when should we have our eyes out for the next one? Is it
It'll be
Stage 2?
Stage 2, you know. I'm not being coy about it. It's, yeah, we're going to have Stage 2. We're going to go to a different part of New Arcadia, so a new reason for the book to exist. But my mind is already spinning, and I plan to start putting pen to paper, or rather fingers to keys, in the next few weeks.
It's amazing. Yeah, I mean, if it's anything like Ready Player One, then I'm sure it's awesome. I didn't read it, but I saw the movie, and I actually saw it in when they do like the like 4D, I guess, and like the seats are moving around and everything like that. So yeah, so I'm sure yours would be, you know, just as enticing, even for someone who doesn't play video games, because I don't, but I still enjoyed it. So.
I wrote this for everyone. It is PG rated, and I made sure that men, women, people who play games, people who don't, will be interested in it and can connect to it, because most people lived through the 80s or 90s, and if not, they know somebody who did. I will say, too, for the audio version specifically, the seats don't rumble, but we have a full original soundtrack as well, and you know, we do different things to draw you into the world. So there are things. It's a great book to read on its own, but the audio experience we made sure was unique and fun and like a movie in many ways too. So that was important to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. All right, so thank you again for being here with us today. It's amazing to have someone who's involved in all these different projects, and thank you so much from all of our writers. So go check out Eric's new book, New Arcadia, and we'll see you guys all next time.
Thank you so much.